And there you have it, where we can now move the container around and move the text around, and you'll be able to lay this out inside the visual editor. Welcome back to Arcade. I am Super Tommy, and in this video we're looking at Phaser Editor 2D again, and we're going to do a preloader scene for your Phaser Editor 2D game. So I have here a brand new Phaser Editor 2D project, and you can get Phaser Editor 2D at phasereditor2d.com. You can just download the installer here for Windows, Mac, and Linux. So if you don't know much about Phaser Editor 2D, you can find out more in our memory match tutorial with Phaser Editor 2D, where we go through making the entire memory match game using Phaser Editor 2D, and we cover components, prefabs, using the visual editor, creating game objects, and all that stuff. We'll link it in the description below. So now we're going to talk about a preloader scene in this video, where you have a scene and we're going to do a little animation that says loading, so that when your game, and if your game has a lot of assets to load, you can load them one time at the very beginning, and then for the rest of the game, your player can just play without having to stop to load new assets. So this works well if your game isn't gigantic or doesn't have a lot of assets that need to be loaded over time. If you can load everything at one time up front, then that's a nice experience for the player. And so let's look at how this setup is in Phaser Editor 2D. So in this main.js file, let me move myself here. And actually, before I do that, so to start Phaser Editor 2D, let me bring up my terminal here. So you need to run Phaser Editor 2D from the terminal and then launch it from the web browser at this address here, localhost or 127.0.0.1. Port 1959. You'll see what the exact address here when it launches. And so you want to use this command here after you're already in the folder containing the Phaser Editor 2D executable. So when you download that file, you can put it anywhere on your computer. I have it in the applications folder of the Mac. So let me just make a new terminal window here. So I have in the root applications folder on my Mac, I have the Phaser Editor 2D downloaded folder in there. And then if you want to see everything in here, I've got the executable, that's this Phaser Editor 2D executable, and then a bunch of folders. And then if you wanted to run it, you want to do this. So dash desktop and dash enable advanced JS editor. It just gives me the nicer code editor that can give you IntelliSense and code complete across different files. So that's the options you want. And when you run this command, you'll get Phaser Editor 2D will do its thing, create a server that you can load in your web browser here at 127.0.0.1, port 1959/editor. It may be different for you or it may not, but you'll see it right here. Then you just go open the browser. It will open the browser automatically for you, in fact, so that should just work. Okay. Now let's look at how this project is set up. So in Phaser Editor 2D, there's this boot scene that's created in the main.js file, and that's added to the game here after the load event from the window. So this is the first scene that starts, and by default, Phaser Editor is going to load the asset pack JSON file for you, and then once that's loaded, it's going to go to levels. So this could take an amount of time depending on how much you have in this asset pack.json, like how many files you've included in your game. You can, of course, have multiple asset packs and then load them. If your game is very large, load them as the player goes through your game. So after it loads this asset pack, it's going to start the level scene, and this is the default level scene here, right here. We're not going to add anything to this. This is just the default level scene that Phaser Editor creates. So we're going to keep this the same so that you can reference it in your project, which may be different if you already added stuff to your game, but you know how the project started to begin with. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is add a loader to this boot scene, right, effectively. So we want to have a loader animation or some loading text while this is loading before it goes to the level scene. So what we're going to do is actually comment this out, since it's going to happen very quickly locally. When you're developing locally, the file download, almost irrespective of how many files you have, you're going to need a lot of files for it to be slow. It's going to be fast. So we're just going to not go to the level after it's done loading, because the loading is going to happen very quickly. So that you can see how we're going to build this preload scene. So in here, we can add code, but instead, let's actually make another scene that will just run when this boot scene starts, and then we'll kill that scene when everything is loaded. So let's go here in Assets, right-click on Assets. You can probably put your scene elsewhere, but we'll just put it here, add a scene file, and we're going to call this, let's call this Preloader, and then create. Okay, so now we have our preloader scene. It's empty. There's nothing here. Let's just pan, zoom, right? This is an empty scene. And we are going to add text. Let's just add text that says loading. And let's put it in the middle for 400, 300. That's the middle. Text. New text, and let's call this loading, ... And we're going to change the origin here to the middle, and let's make the text bigger. Right, okay, so this is not animated, but we'll have this scene to start so you can see that it's working. Now let's save this. Now it generated this preloader.js, which is great. Right here. So now we're going to want to start this scene at the same time that main.js is loaded, or even before, because we're gonna add the preloader scene to our game and then call it from boot. So now in Phaser Editor, you see there's this script set up in the HTML file, the index.html file. So in order to use the preload scene, we are going to source equals, add it here and like this. Okay, save. So now we're going to load this preloader.js file here, right? And then let's go to main. So preloader will exist when main is run. And now we want to add preloader. So do game.scene.add. Let's just give it preloader. Okay. Let's just follow this code syntax. Code style. We just follow this code style with the semicolons, even though if you watch many videos here, I generally leave it, but just to match this file. And so in the boot scenes preload, we can actually launch the preloader scene here. Now, usually you see that happen in Create or something because you're maybe preloading things that you need. But in our case, our preloader scene is not going to have anything in this asset pack JSON, which is very important. So you'll notice that we did not add our preloader scene to the asset pack. So if we open the asset pack here, you see that the level scene is added to the asset pack. Now, because our preloader has to be used before we've loaded the asset pack, we can't put it in the asset pack and be able to use it. Okay, so then that's why we put it here in index. We're referencing it directly in the index file. Now, go back to main. So what we can do is launch the preload in preload or even in init. I think we can add init here, but I think this will work too. This .scene.launch, and we can launch preloader. Save. Now all our file is saved. Let's hit this run button here. And okay, so you see that our scene has loaded, so the code is working correctly, which is always good. Checking early and often is always good. So we launch our preloader scene, and then we tell Phaser what to load. And in this case, we only have this asset pack, but it could be large. And then once we're done, we're going to want to clean this up. So this .scene.stop preloader Now we can just try this, and what should happen is you won't even see the preloader scene at all. So let's run this. Right. Let's just do it again so you can see. Yep. Since it happens so quickly, you're not even going to see it. But we will need this. So let's just comment this out for now. Save. So that's basically how you add the preloader. So now that's the crux of it, but we're going to show you how to add an animation to it as well. Now we're actually going to look at some new loading animations that we've produced at Arcade. If you go to phaserloading.com, we've got a bunch of loading animations that you can use, like this clock, this text speech bubble, gears, ellipsis, and you can see more about them here. These are the basic spinners. We've got colorful plus ones and a set here of premium ones that you can use. So we're going to show you, I'm going to pick one of these and use them. We can use, let's use this circle dots, right? Or maybe roller dots. This looks pretty cool. But you can go to phaserloading.com and here's the prices for them. So go check them out. We've got 30 in total. It's about $1.50 each. And we're going to be adding more to this package. So if you buy now, you lock in the lower price. All right, so back here to Phaser Editor. Let's go here. So if you do buy the Phaser Loading bundle, you'll get the source code for that. And we have another YouTube video if you just want to make your own loading animation. The 2 loading animations in Phaser 3 that we'll link in the description as well. But we're just going to use a pre-made one that we already have. So let's just pick it. And we're going to use ES5. Let's use the ES6 version. We're just going to modify it a little bit. So with the Phaser Loading bundle, it'll come with scripts that'll transpile the TypeScript code into ES5 and ES6 versions. Let's do roller dots, because I think that was cool. Let's do roller dots non-color, just for simplicity here. Well, they use Bezier easing. Let's see. Let's just keep it simpler just for this. In this case, because you'll have to get this library if you want to use it with Phaser Editor. So we'll just keep it with circled dots, a simpler version, or actually, I just use this and use a different ease. So I'll show you how you can change easing if you do get this loading animations bundle. So let's just copy this. So we copied this roller dots file. Now let's go to assets. We're going to add a new script here. New file. And we're going to call it rollerdots.js. Create. Just paste this in. So we're not going to use Bezier easing, and we're not going to export. We're just going to call it a class because we're not using modules here, so we don't need the export, or we can't use the export actually. And this is the code, and let's see. So we're going to change this to something else. So we're using this Bezier. I can't pronounce this word. Bezier easing. Bezier. It's like cubic Bezier. I think that seems easier to pronounce. Easing that you see in CSS animations. Phaser.math.easing. We don't need to import Phaser. There's no exports and imports here. .easing. So let's use, these are the built-in easing functions from Phaser itself, and they're generally pretty good. I'm just gonna try. Not actually sure what the animation looks like afterwards, but so we do that. So we change that. Let's look for any more instances of Bezier easing. Nope, that's it. Now let's save that. So the key things to remember here is we've removed the export default and the importing of Phasers. We don't need it in Phaser Editor 2D. Or at least in this project setup for Phaser Editor 2D. Everything else should be fine. So that's good. And now, so these loading animations don't require any assets. They're all created dynamically in code using Phaser game objects or graphics. So let's see, this one uses dots which is just an array of dots, and those dots are probably phaser dot game object dot arc. So it's a phaser arc. So it requires no additional assets. So let's go back here to index. So now, like we said before, we need this class before the asset pack is loaded. We're not putting it in the asset pack because we're using it before the asset pack is going to be loaded. So circle, roller dots .js, right? Roller dots. Okay, save. Now let's just run it to make sure it's still working. Okay, any errors? Nope. So that's good. Always good to check for errors, even though it looks like it's running. Can't close it. Close. There we go. All right, so now we have our roller dots. Let's go into our preloader scene. Now, what we're going to want to do is create a preloader create the preload animation, the roller dots animation that we have in the create method of the preloader scene. But this is generated code, so we can't write it in here. If we do, Phaser Editor will overwrite it if we make changes to the scene. So what we can do instead, let me go to the left now, is here, if you select the scene, the preloader.scene file, and in the inspector, you can specify a different create method. So we're going to call this editor create. So this is the create method generated by Phaser Editor. Call it editor.create. We'll save this file. And then you'll see here, did I save? Nope. Editor create. Let's press enter. Nope. Editor. Okay, save. Right, so now all that code that we had before is now in the editor create method, which is not going to be automatically called. So in fact, if you run this, you'll see that nothing happens because editor create is not called. So what we can do is make our own create method, the normal create method that Phaser expects, and then do this dot editor create. In which case, editor create will be called, and we'll have our loading text here. Now, on top of that, we're going to want to add our roller dots. So roller dots dot create. So we pass in the scene, and let's just put it at 400 to 50. We'll leave the radius to the default, and we're going to call play on it. Save that. That looks good, and let's run it. Look at the ease is not so good. Let's go back here and let's see what is a better ease we can use. I'm generally in favor of sine. Let's see. Save. Yep, that's not bad. That's even close to what we had. Okay, so that's here. Now you see the organization or the layout here is not so great. And of course, one of the great things about Phaser Editor is you can lay out things visually. So now how can we make it so that we can lay out this preload animation or this loading animation with our text visually? Now there is a way to do that. And it's a combination of features that Phaser Editor has and the Phaser loading animation that we're using has. So first thing, let's add a container. So we're going to add a container here to our scene up here. So now we can visually drag this around. Let's say we put that over here. And let's say we then move that. Now back here, container. Let's name this loading anim container, and we're going to scope this to the class. So this means you can get it by this dot loading anim container. That's good. Let's save that. Let's go back to preloader. So in our generated file here, you see this dot loading anim container is created for us, and here you can do an add to container and give it a container. So the loading anim container. and then we can reposition the roller dots to a new XY in the container. Now we could do this, or if we know we're putting it in a container, we can just set the X and Y to 0 here. Let's save that. Let's give it a run. And there you have it, where we can now move the container around and move the text around, and you'll be able to lay this out inside the visual editor. So it doesn't look very centered, but let's just fix that. Just move it a little bit. Sometimes they're centered in numbers and centered in your eyes. That looks better. Although maybe now everything is off center now. That looks pretty good, right? So here's the loading animation. You can adjust it up to. It seems like it's too far away. Save that. Run. Right, great. So now last thing here, just to show you that it in fact does load into the level scene here. So in a normal game, if you published it on the web in your own game with many more assets, music files, all that stuff in your asset pack, it'll take a second, 2 seconds, maybe 5 seconds. It depends. And having an animated loader, that's interesting. Sort of like this, or any of the other ones that we see here. Maybe even gears, clock, whatever it might be. Interesting things to look at. Time sort of passes by faster, even if it's the same 5 seconds. So just to emulate that, we're going to do this.time.delayed call here. We're going to delay this, let's just say 3 seconds. And then we are going to load into our game like this. So we're going to stop the preloader scene because preloading is done. And then we're going to start our level scene, or whatever your main game scene is. It could be a menu, in fact, if depending on how your game is set up. All right, save that. Let's try it. So we're going to see this loading for about 3 seconds. And then we go to our game scene. So that's it. That's adding a preloader to Phaser Editor 2D. Key to remember, you want to be able to access your preloader scene and whatever preload animation you're using, either from Phaser loading or when you create. We have a video to show you how to do that. Before, you don't want to put it in the asset pack. You want it to be available when this boot scene starts, which means you have to go to the index.html file and include them in script tags like this. And then you can just set up your preloader scene here visually in Phaser Editor. You can add other things here if you wanted, maybe different loading animations, but you don't want to have it to make too many things. Although if they're not loading image assets, it'll be so fast it really wouldn't matter. And so that's it. Phaser Editor 2D preload scene. If you like this video, do give us a like and subscribe for more videos on making games with Phaser Editor 2D.